Hey everyone, welcome to yet another Atlassian Live Learning. Today we're going to be focusing on workflows. So if you're a Jira administrator, the good news is that this should work, fingers crossed, should work for anybody in the cloud or on data center. We're just going to be focusing in and just specifically looking at workflows, Jira workflows, all the different types of configurations, everything you need to know in the next 55 or so minutes. So we're going to have a lot of fun. Before we get started, though, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, we are on the Jira Life, so feel free to show your support here. Hit that subscribe button for the Jira Life channel, and we're going to get into a couple more details in a minute. Now, before we get too far, let me just kind of walk you through what we're going to be covering here today, and then we're just going to jump into Jira. Very common question that we get is, will the slides be made available? And the answer is usually no, because we're in Jira. So I'm just going to use the slides to kind of help guide me and make sure I stay on topic. But in a minute or so, we're going to jump straight into Jira, and everything's in Jira. So feel free to pull up your own personal Jira if you have one. I don't recommend playing around in production systems, but if you have a sandbox or your very own personal Jira, this would be the greatest opportunity for you to pull those up and start getting ready to follow along with this. So as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing in on workflows. Last month, we focused in on issue types, okay? And so we're just going to be trending through over the next few months, covering and going in depth into these very common configurations that we do as Jira administrators. So you don't want to miss out on any of these sessions because they're not duplicates of each other. They are very specialized, very focused topics. So today, blinders on, only workflows. And so we're going to jump into this and have a lot of fun. Now, before we get too far as well, as Rodney here in the chat is already starting off, if you can just let us know where you're tuning in from, we'd love to see where in the world you are at. And also, let me know how many years of Jira administration experience you have. This is going to be a slightly more technical topic. If you've attended some of my other live learnings, this is going to not be as for common folk, if you will. This is going to be specialized for Jira administrators. So I'm very curious to find out how many years of experience you have as a Jira admin. Let me know. Let me and Ronnie know here in the chat. All right. So what are we going to be covering today? We're going to talk about statuses, transitions, and then obviously those are part of workflow. So we're going to talk about workflows. We'll talk about workflow schemes and then applying the workflows to a project. And I'm basically going to give you my tips and tricks over the last 7 or 8 years that I've been a Jira admin, the gotchas that have gotten me over the years, and some just helpful tips that will make your life a little bit easier. Who am I? My name is Alex. You may recognize me if you've ever Googled a question on how to do something in Jira. My goal is that my face pops up, and so I have what is becoming a fairly large YouTube channel here, Ape Tech Tutorials. And so scan that QR code. That's going to take you over to my link tree where you'll be able to subscribe to this channel. You'll be able to subscribe to the Jira Live. This channel. You'll be able to subscribe to Ape Tech. Ronnie and I and a couple of others just published a book. So our book is on there available if you want to purchase it. It's all about DevOps using the Atlassian tools. So highly recommend you check that out. I also have other courses. I have some paid ones. I have some free ones. I have membership opportunities. I have just a lot of different resources. Everything is in that link tree. So scan that QR code right there. And just a little bit about me. I do have an ACP 520. I'm working on the 120 next, and we're going to be doing a live series here starting very, very soon. So stay tuned for that. I have a bachelor's in computer engineering, a master's in systems engineering, and again, 7 or 8 years being a Jira admin. So with that out of the way, hopefully you had a chance here to scan the QR code and had a chance to subscribe to the channel. Let's just jump into Jira. We're going to come back at the end here to these slides, but for now, we're just going to talk Jira. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to a Jira that I have, and let me see if I can find it, because finding these URLs are usually not the easiest. Here it is. I have many, many different Jiras, right? And we are going to be focusing in on workflows. Now, workflows is very, very important, and there's a lot to cover. So we're just going to jump right into it, okay? So first and foremost, what is a workflow? So let's start off by defining a workflow. So the workflow is basically when you look, most users don't really know that there's a workflow. Users of Jira, not the admins. As an admin, I expect you to know what a workflow is. But when you're interfacing with just regular users of Jira, a lot of people don't know what a workflow is. But they very much do know about their board columns. And so the workflow directly is correlated with the board columns. And so in order for you to add extra columns to a board or reshuffle or rename those columns inside your Scrum boards or your Kanban boards in Jira, well, those are manipulated by your workflow under the hood, right? And so there's a lot of different things we can do with workflows. And in fact, I think we could even spend 2-3 hours talking about just workflows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to extract the most important things about a workflow and try to show them to you today. So these are going to be the common things that I'm doing day in and day out, so that you're aware of what you should be aware of. Okay, because as a new Jira admin, workflows, there's a couple of different ways to get fired here. There's a couple of different ways to really mess things up. And I'm going to try to navigate you and hopefully put you on the right path so you don't get fired, or at least don't get into trouble, or at the very minimum, don't do the mistakes that someone like Rodney and I have done early on in our careers, right? Because everything I'm going to tell you, I have scars. I have personally been through that battle and have gotten hurt already. So learn from my mistakes, and so do as I say, not as I do. And so let's just jump back into Jira. And now that I've gotten that little spiel out of the way, let's kind of focus in on workflows. At any point, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I have Rodney here. He's on the chat monitoring. So if you have any technical questions, please feel free to ask. We have a couple of experts, and I will be taking some breaks throughout this training to kind of address and answer some of those questions. So feel free to please do take advantage of that chat and ask your questions there. All right. So when we talk about workflows, I like to start at the project level. There is a main central global configuration for workflows. We're going to be talking a lot about that in a minute, but I like to start at the project mainly because I don't have a really big attention span. Let me rephrase. My memory is not the best. And so I can never remember which workflow belongs to which project. So I like going to the project whenever I have to do any manipulations of workflow, any configurations. I like going into the project in which that configuration is required. I go down to project settings. You do need to be a project level admin. And I don't know that I should be saying this, but obviously you're going to need to be a Jira administrator and have either Jira admin rights, administrator rights, site or org admin rights in order to be able to do any of this stuff. So hopefully it goes without saying. But once you're in a project, the other thing that you need to know is that I am going to be in a company managed project. If you're using team managed projects, you're not going to get the same effect, because team managed projects are the most basic, rudimentary, super easy to configure workflows where all you can do is add and remove statuses, and that's pretty much it. I think you might be able to add transitions, but honestly, I don't spend a whole lot of time in team managed projects. And as a Jira admin, the onus is usually on that owner of that team managed project. And so we don't really use team managed projects here in the professional world. Everything is a company managed project. And if you're on data center, you don't even know what a team managed project is. So everything is full power here with company managed projects. So just a spoiler, in case your UI doesn't look the same, it's because I'm in a company managed project. And if you are using a team managed project, I think you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice. As a Jira admin, if you want to elevate your skills to that next level, you 100% should be locking down and knowing how to do these on these company managed projects. So I'm going to click, now that I'm in the project settings of a project, I'm going to click on workflows. And as you can see here, we have workflows. Now, what are some of the common things that you do here? So there's usually 2 or 3 different common things that we do. Number one, we can swap out the scheme. Now, what is a scheme? Well, I like to present the scheme as a bucket, okay? And in that bucket, you can put workflows. And so it's just a container of workflows. And so if you go out and define a bunch of workflows, which again is a little bit more sophisticated, but if you were to go out and create like 5 new workflows for each issue type, which again, I'll talk about more in a second, well, you can define all your workflows with all the statuses and all the transitions, and you can put all those 5 workflows into a workflow scheme. And now that scheme can be applied to a project. So here, if you were ever able to do that or wanted to do that, this is where you would do that. Now we're going to try that in a little bit. So I'm just letting you know, again, 3 common things that I usually do in this screen, which is switch the scheme completely, or oftentimes, this is a more common use case, I will create a new workflow. Maybe I want a special workflow just for my story or just for my bug. and we'll create a new workflow. And then I will come in here and add that workflow. And again, we're going to go through the motions of this in just a few minutes. But this is another very common thing that I'm doing fairly often, at least once a week, where I am taking a new workflow or maybe even an existing workflow, and I'm going to apply it here to an existing issue type, or replace this workflow altogether, which again, we'll go through the motions in a second. But the third and most common thing that I'm doing is I'm adding a status or a transition to just this workflow. And so the most common thing that I do, I would say about 80% of the time, it's going to be to edit an existing workflow. And so there's a couple of different ways to edit an existing workflow. You can go through the global configurations, or, and if your memory sucks like mine, you can come into the project, find the workflow you want to modify, and click this little pencil. Now, spoilers, some people, Atlassian is slowly rolling out updates to the UI because Atlassian likes to update Jira every day, all day. And so some folks might start seeing like the text, written words, like letters that say edit workflow, and then like there's a remove workflow. So I'm just gonna click on that little pencil. Hopefully you still have the OG UI and you have the pencil, and we are inside the workflow editor. Now this item over here, you can ignore. It's always popping up for me, mainly because of my screen resolution. Just click that little X. And my friends, we have arrived at the workflow editor. Now, it is also my understanding that some people, because of Atlassians, again, they're changing things each and every day, all day, every day. Some people might have a new editor. I still prefer this old one, so I stick with it as much as possible, but there is a new editor, and so just buyer beware, because your UI might not look exactly the same as mine, but I'm going to be using the old school traditional workflow editor that I've just grown to love and use. Okay, so what do we do here? What's the most common thing? I would say 90% of the time, and these are high numbers, folks. I'm just pulling numbers out of thin air here, but a huge amount of time, most of the time, right? I'm adding a status to a workflow. And the reason that is because somebody's asked me to basically add a column. They want a new column to your workflow, right? And so I need to come in here and add a new status. Now, one thing that I want you to be very, very careful here. If you've ever joined us on the Jira Live, you know that I have a couple of fireable offenses. And I know Rodney, who's watching this, he's going to be having a blast when I say this, but it is very common for you to come in here, right? It is very common for you to come into your workflow and go, oh, I don't want my status of done to say done. I want it to say something like accepted or completed, right? You want it to say a different name. And it's very easy for you to click on this done status and go, I don't want this status anymore. Click on the edit and rename it to like complete. When you do that, if you're multitasking, I want you to give me the next 10 seconds of your attention. When you rename a status, even though that this says that this software simplified workflow project mobile is shared by only one and only one project, the moment that I click edit and I rename the status to complete, I have just immediately, or when I hit save, rename this status for everyone. So the done status no longer exists. And this will break anybody who's using that done status, any JQL that's using it, any dashboard that's using it, anywhere and everywhere that done is referenced is now broken. And to me, it's a fireable offense. To Rodney, it's your passage and your right to become a Jira admin, because all of us do that. I've done that. Rodney's done that. And any self-respected Jira admin has renamed the status. But this is why you're here. You're here to not make those same mistakes. And so never, ever, 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 ever rename a status. Never do this. The only time that I think it's okay for you to rename a status is if you just created it. You just created a brand new status, and you're like, oops, I typoed it, or that's not the right one that I wanted. Now you can rename it, because you can guarantee that you just made it and there's nobody's using it, right? So it's very easy. But 99% of the time, never rename a status. The proper way to add a new status, like completed, is to click on add status, type in the word complete, and then you'll notice that it already exists. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to click this little checkbox. I'll go over what those details are in a second, and then click add. And now we have this new status. But we have new problems. We have two statuses now, done and complete. What do we do with both of those? We don't want them, right? We only want complete. So you would be tempted to remove the status, but notice that it says we can't do that. So we're going to cover this in a second here. So sit tight. We will talk about how to do that. I'm going to remove this status though. Notice that complete I can remove because no issues exist under that status. I just added it a few seconds ago, and now I'm just getting rid of it. Okay. And so this is very critical for you to understand that you cannot delete a status, an existing status from an active workflow. Okay. And you'll know that it's active because it says up here that it's shared by a project. You'll know that it's inactive because it'll say literally the words inactive. But let's take a step back because I'm throwing a lot of things at you, right? Let's talk about adding a status though, right? So instead of adding that complete status, right, let's just add like an in review status, right? And so I'm going to go over here to this plus add status, and I'm going to type in the words in review. Now, this is your best case. This is best case scenario where the status that you want already exists in your ecosystem of Jira. This is, again, best case because it's already there. It's already created. And so all you need to do is select it. You do have to click on it. And once you do that, you will then have an option to select this checkbox. And this checkbox says, allow all statuses to transition to this one. This is totally optional. But what does this checkbox do? Well, you'll notice over here on the right-hand side that every single one of these statuses has an arrow that points into it, and it has the text all. And basically all that means is that when you are in that status, you're able to transition to any other status that has this all as well. Or you can transition to any status that has a direct line, which we'll talk about in a second, connecting those statuses together, right? This all also means that if a user or a ticket is in a different status, because you have the checkbox enabled and you have that arrow that says all pointing to your status, to this status, that means that from any other status, doesn't matter if they have all or not, but any other status allows you to transition into the status you're about to add. So depends on how complex you want your workflow to be. The easiest thing to do is select the checkbox and click add. And at this point, we've added this new workflow, right? And we're done, almost, right? But that's the easiest way to add a status. But there's a couple of problems here, okay? First thing I want to show you, check this out. If I go to my project, mobile, and I'm going to open up a new tab, you'll notice that my columns, right? There's no in review status. There's no in review column. You're like, okay, well, that's an easy fix, Alex. I'm just going to go to my configure board. I'm going to go to my columns. If and when it loads, I'm going to go to my columns and I'm just going to drag. Wait, where's my in review status? It's not there. In the chat, anybody know why my in review status is not there? It's in my workflow, right? It's right here. This is the software simplified workflow for Project Mobile. It's in here. I just added my status. Why is it not showing up on the board? Why is it not a status that I can use? Anybody want to take a guess? Who's feeling lucky today? Come on, chat. This is a two-way street. This is how you learn, by guessing or providing an answer in the chat. So if nobody answers, we're gonna have to make Ronnie answer the question. Why is my status of in review, even though I just added it to my workflow, not visible? Who wants to take a guess? Rodney, I think you're gonna have to guess for them because nobody's guessing. It has no. Okay, so Juliet has a great question, a great observation. It's not. It has no incoming transition. Well, that's part of the problem, but not really, because notice that this all is basically the in and out transition. So that's not it, right? And even Rodney is wrong because adding it to the board is the step I'm trying to do, but I can't do that because the status doesn't show up. But here we are, Famil here, and Remy, a couple of people. Great observation. This is a very common thing that you forget as a beginner Jira admin. Whenever you make changes to your workflow, you have to publish your draft. And Jira, sometimes, depending on the screen size, does a really, really good job at making sure that publish button is like hidden. And so don't get frustrated if you're making changes to your workflows, and they're not those changes aren't showing up. It's because every time you add a status, you have to publish that draft. So I'm going to publish, and again, it's hidden. And I always select no, but it's up to you if you want to make copies. I never do, but you select no. And now when I refresh the screen over here, my status should be available. See, now it's over here on the left, and now I can add it as a column, but we'll come back to that later. We're not quite ready yet. So let's keep talking about statuses. So that was honestly, friends, the best case scenario. That right there, if my salary was like, hey, Alex, just add statuses, that's what I want to get paid to do all day, every day. Those are like, what's his name? Somebody help me. The basketball player with the shoes, not Jordan, the other one, the one for that plays in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. Somebody help me. No, not LeBron. The other guy. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on basketball players right now? What is his name? Curry, yes, Curry. So I'm told that Curry can make those free throws and 3-pointers all day long, eyes closed, right? So this right here, adding a status like what we just did, that's my Curry moment, right? That is just like I can do this in my sleep all day long. I can close my eyes and it's just gonna happen automatically. Unfortunately, it goes down here from there. Everything else gets a little bit more complex. So let's talk a little bit more about these things. So what happens if I add a status? Let's just do, let's add a status of canceled. What happens if I just add it, but I didn't check the checkbox? Well, I can publish it. So I can publish this status and I can click no and hit publish, right? And when I refresh my backlog over here, my board, you should see canceled as a status, right? But there's a fundamental problem. I think earlier somebody, I forget who it was. Let's see if we can go up here. Right? But Juliet had it right here, right? So Juliet's like, hey, there's no transitions. And so what this does is, this is a very silly thing to do, but to just add a status and leave it hanging like that does nobody any good, because no issue can transition to it and no issue can transition out of it. You can import to canceled if you're doing a bulk import, but nothing can go in and out of canceled. So naturally, you want to add a transition to it. And so the easiest transition is obviously to do this checkbox. And now when I hit publish, now my issues will be able to transition in and out of canceled, right? Mainly because all the other transitions have the all, right? But don't do that. Don't ever just add a status like this and not do anything with it, because it's not going to be useful, right? But we don't always want to add the checkbox. And let me tell you why. Because when you add the checkbox, right, it doesn't matter the order, right? I'm just going to mess my order up here just for a second here. I'm going to move done. I'll leave done right there. Okay. So I just move things around. And when I publish, right, I'm just going to publish just so that you guys can see that I'm not doing any trickery for you, right? But when you publish your workflow and you go back to Jira and you open up an issue, right, so I'm going to open up an issue. Over here, the status is on the right-hand side. So now that I've added those two statuses, I would expect the statuses to be in that order, right? I would expect Jira to respect this order and give it to me to do, done, architecture, accepted, testing, in progress, in review, and then canceled all the way at the bottom. But when I click on my statuses over here, the reality is that that's not the case. Jira gives it to me in a very specific order. And the way this order is determined is alphabetical order by color, right? It will follow the status category, which is either the gray to do, the blue in progress, or the green done categories. And then it's going to give you an alphabetical order by that color. And so as you can see, A's over here are first in blue, but then canceled, C comes before D in the done category. And some users don't want that, because that could be confusing for your users, right? That means that your users could essentially transition from any status to any other status. And at that point, I would argue, if I was your coach, right, if you were paying me to coach you and your team, I would argue that this is the way you want to go. This is the best way, not because I'm a lazy Jira admin, but because you don't want to solve the problem of like, hey, well, I have my team can go from to do straight to done, right? Well, yeah, but you have a people problem if they're doing that. If your team is in to do and they're basically cheating and not updating the rest of the statuses or not going through the workflow and they go straight to done, your team is doing you a disservice. So what a lot of companies do, what a lot of teams out there do is like they'll be like, okay, I see you, I see you cheating. We're gonna stop that. And in order to stop that, you manipulate your transitions here. We're gonna add transitions, right? But I don't think that that's the right answer. It's an answer, definitely. And it's the answer that like 90% of teams out there do. But honestly, I would spend more time coaching your team and telling them why they shouldn't go straight to done. But again, that requires a different level of discipline, maturity, that way out of scope for this course. So let's assume though that you do fall with 90% of the other scenario where what we do is you're like, you know what? My team is not disciplined enough, not mature enough to have this trust of being able to transition to any status. We need to explicitly take them down the path to from to do all the way to done. And so there, my friends, we start talking more about transitions. So let's talk about transitions here. So what exactly is a transition? Well, I like to describe transitions as a verb. It's what you're doing to get from one status to the other. I like to treat it as a verb, right? I like to say, hey, um, the status is a noun, it's something you are, right? Person, place, or thing. And the transition is the verb that you're doing, right? So again, just my opinion, but whatever you want your transitions to be, it's all up to you. Whatever you want your statuses to be, it's all up to you. But that's just my 2 cents. So the first thing that I would do though is if I'm gonna go down this route of like, hey, you know what? I can't, my team needs explicit transitions. This all allow any status to transition, not working for us. The first thing you want to do is remove these transitions because if you don't, if you leave the all, then you're just gonna create more clutter, right? You're gonna create a lot more clutter because your team will still be able to bypass all the transitions we're about to do. So that's no bueno. We don't want that at all, right? And so you want to turn all of these off. Well, whatever makes sense, right? Wherever you do want your team to be able to bypass, leave them there. But if you don't want your team to bypass, then you have to make sure you turn it off. Like cancel's a great one. I want to be able to cancel from any status. So I'll just leave it like that, right? To do is another good one. Like maybe I want from any status to go back to do. So I'll just leave it, right? And so now we're left with these workflows, right? That looks very similar to what we just had. But if I were to publish this, we would have a huge problem. The problem would be, I'm just gonna hit publish here real quick, that when I publish this workflow, and now that I've removed all those allow all transitions to transition, when I try to, and I'm gonna see how this is there, all these statuses, and when I hit refresh, I'm only, now that I'm in the status of done here, I anticipate to only see one and only one status. Can anybody guess in the chat? When I click on this drop down, what status is going to be present? And maybe we'll put Rodney back on the spot again. Which status, when I hit this drop down, should be present out of all the statuses that were out there? Who wants to take a guess? And folks, this is way more interactive when you guys actually type into the box. Otherwise, we add a lot of dead space into the training. So, Rodney, for the $1 million, what status will I see when I hit the drop down? And hopefully Rodney is like not in another meeting or multitasking. Cancel. Okay. So we're seeing one that canceled. So let's hit the drop down. So whoa, yes. So you guys are technically right. I did make a mistake. You should see 2 statuses. We should see canceled and to do. And the reason that is because those are my 2 statuses that still have those alls pointing to it. And so that's essentially what I've created. But notice that I can't go to any other status now, right? All the other statuses are now dead. And they're dead because there's no lines going in or out of them at all, right? And so we're going to fix that. So let's go deeper into what a transition is, right? Ronnie's like, you act like I was typing up. Yes, multitasking at its finest. So how do we fix this problem, right? Because this is not a situation you want to be in, right? You don't want to be in this situation here. So naturally, what you want to do is you're going to be in an active workflow. Notice that I said the word active. I'm being very intentional here, right? In an active workflow, you're going to be like, okay, I see you, Jira. I see what you're doing. So let me just do this. Then I'm going to hover over a status. You'll notice that there's little bubbles all around. I'm going to put my cursor right on top of that, and I'm going to click and hold. and drag my mouse down to the next status. I'm going to let go. And now it's going to ask me for a name here. And this is that verb I was telling you about, right? I'm going to say start architecture review. And I'm going to click on add. And you'll notice that it says, I cannot perform this operation on a draft workflow. This is misleading. This is basically, it should tell you, you cannot perform this operation on an active workflow. So folks, this is hit or miss. I've modified thousands and thousands of workflows. And to this date, it's a flip of a coin. It's a 50-50 chance that this will work, right? And so what you need to do, and the best practice is, the moment that you want to delete a status or add a transition, you will need to make a copy of the workflow. As a general rule of thumb, you can remove transitions and you can add new statuses with no problem. But deleting a status or removing a status and adding a transition, Jira's got a huge problem. I don't know why. I wish Atlassian would fix that. But essentially, for the next step, this is something we're going to have to do and get used to doing quite often. So what I like to do is I like to take the text here. I like to copy it. And notice that I'm no longer in my project. Remember way early at the beginning, I was in that project mobile. I'm not there anymore. And I'm under the global configurations of Jira. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I'm there, and I'm going to click on workflows. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to search for that workflow, right? And it's here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to do a copy. And when I do that copy, it's going to give me a name. I highly recommend you change it, because if you don't, you're going to have a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And 50 copies later, you're going to have these long, giant copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, your workflow name. So what I like to do, this is my new thing, I like to just back it on up, go all the way to the end, and I like to just put like today's date. So 8/19, right? And hit copy. Because now I know, because I do this a lot. Now I know that I'm working on that version from that date. Because trust me, there will be a time where you have like 30 versions of this. So that's what I like to do there. I like to just, again, put my date on it, or put some indicator that says, hey, this is a new workflow. Okay, so now that I did that, now I can do what I was trying to do. Notice though, however, before I get that far, that this now says inactive, right? We're now making changes on an active workflow. I'm sorry, an inactive workflow. And what does that mean? Well, the first thing is I can delete statuses now. This accepted status, I don't want it, gone. It's not a problem anymore. If I try to do that in the other one, right, I'm just going to show you, right? If I go back to this active one, right, notice that this is active. This is and under the active section. If I try to edit this and I try to delete that accepted status, nope, you can't do that. You can't remove an active status from an active workflow. So you have to be in the inactive, right? So you have to make a copy whenever you want to delete a status. So I'm going to go back to my inactive one. I'm just going to go back to edit, right? And so now you can delete whatever you want. I already did the deletion. But now, most importantly, I can add my transitions. So now I can do my start arc review. And now I can click add, right? And now I can do the rest. I can go start testing, right? And now I can explicitly add start dev progress, right? So now you can add your statuses your transitions exactly how you want. Ready for review, right? These can be whatever you want them. Review complete. Anything you want. Sky's the limit here. But we have a new problem, folks. We have a new problem. What happens if I want to go back up a status, right? Well, you can't, right? Because if you're taking notes, make sure you write this down. When you go down this route, when you determine that you're like, you know what, we are not going to allow this transition all. We want to explicitly call out our transitions. When you go down this route, the thing that you gain is that your team can only go down that path. That's the only path forward. So your team must go through those steps in that workflow in order to get to the finish line. So no longer can they cheat and go straight to the finish line. So this is good, right? But the bad part is because we've eliminated that allow any issue to transition to any issue, what we now have to worry about is we now have to explicitly and very intentionally put all of our transitions the way we need them to be. And so if we want to be able to go back, if testing fails, I have to put a transition that says testing failed. Because if I don't do that, there is not going to be any way for me to go from testing back up. Now, this becomes even more problematic if I want to go from testing back to do. So I now have to add a line from testing, right? And it says start over, right? I have to very explicitly add a transition. Because if I don't, then Jira's not going to know about this transition. I won't be able to go from testing back to do. And this, my friends, is where we open up Pandora's box to create an Etch-a-Sketch. So complex picture. Let's see what I get from complex pictures. This is probably not what I want. Let's do Etch-a-Sketch complex maze. So we end up, my friends, with this. This is what your workflows end up looking like, right? You're going to have a transition that goes from every which status to another status. And it becomes a huge mess really, really quickly, right? You want to avoid, as Rodney has here, you want to avoid these spaghetti workflows. So when you're doing your transitions, you want to be, I don't know if you folks have ever heard of the KISS principle, keep it simple, right? You want to keep your transitions as simple as possible. Challenge every transition, challenge every status, because every status and every transition that we add to our workflows is just going to be opportunities to create more complexity in these workflows. And as a Jira admin, like it doesn't matter, right? I don't care, right? It's not my I get paid to do these configurations. So if you want 1,000 statuses and 10,000 transitions, awesome. I get paid by the hour, so it's just going to take me longer, right? But you're not doing yourself and your team a favor. You want to, your job as a Jira admin is to guide and coach your teams in the right direction. And the right direction is not to add transitions that go everywhere. It's my biggest pet peeve when everybody's like, okay, well, I want to be able to transition from this to this status and from in progress to this one, from in progress to cancel, from in progress to in review, from in progress to done, right? I want to go from done back to cancel, from done to do. Well, guess what, folks? When you have a transition, an explicit line that goes from every status to every other status, you just created this checkbox. And it is so much cleaner to just do the checkbox. But then you may be asking, Alex, but you said if we do the checkbox, we lose the order. Because one thing I haven't mentioned yet is when I explicitly do this, when I explicitly put lines for my workflow, the dropdown is in the order in which you call it, right? And so things will be in the right order. But if you recall, when I said when we use this checkbox, we will not have the order, right? It's an alphabetical order done for us. But there is a way to do this. Now, I don't do this often. I'm not the biggest fan, but there is the ability for you to do Jira workflow. Rodney, help me out here. What's the name of this thing? Status position, I think it would be the best thing. I'm not sure. Rodney, you're gonna have to help me out and tell me workflow properties. Okay. Workflow properties. And there's this, I think, ops bar. Is it the ops bar sequence? Yeah. So this is what you want to go look at, because if you do this transition all, but you still want them in a specific order, it is possible for you to do what's called a workflow property and set the sequences so that they're given to you and displayed in the right order. Okay. Now, this again is a little bit more advanced. So I'm just gonna, this is as far as I'm going with that. I'm not actually going to show you a demo of it. But if you're interested in that, this is definitely a 201, 301, if not 401 level topic here. But check this out if you still want to keep the transition, right? Respect the -all transition to simplify your workflow, but then use that workflow property to alter the order of your statuses. Now, another tip. Do not do this under extreme caution, right? But do not, I wouldn't recommend you publish this workflow, because when you have this, when you have transitions that go into it, explicit transitions like this testing failed, right? And we have the all, you're just going to be overwhelmed with 3 transitions out of testing that go to like essentially the same place. And it's very confusing. So I would pick and choose. I would not do all, right? So you either have the explicit or you have the all, allow all transition, but I wouldn't mix and match this too much, right? I would keep this either explicit transitions or all of them with the dash all, right? But if you mix and match, it's just going to add, again, more complexity. So now that we have this workflow, right? Now that we've created this workflow, we want to apply it, right? Because this workflow is not the active workflow. And so what we want to do now is we want to go to our project, right? There's multiple ways to do this. You can go in here, you can go through the workflow schemes and do it. But again, I have like the shortest short-term memory. So I like to go into my project, go to my project settings, go to my workflows. Again, it's a couple of extra steps, but you're guaranteeing you're doing it in the right spot. And this is where we're going to add a workflow. So if you remember from earlier, this is what we're talking about. This choose from marketplace, I've never used this. Chat, has anybody ever used this? Why is this on here? Has anybody ever actually used a workflow from the marketplace? I'm very curious. So if you have, let me know in the chat. Otherwise, add existing is where like 99.99999% of the time, out of the 3,000 workflows I modified over my career, all of them have been add existing. I've never once clicked on that add from the marketplace. Okay. So we will click on that add, right? And then these are in alphabetical order. So we have to go down to the S's, because if you remember, that's the name of our workflow. And we just got to find it. So here it is, 819. This is the workflow we had. We come do a quick check. Yep, this is the one I just modified. It also tells me here's who made the change and when. I'm going to click on next. And this, my friends, is where we're presented with another fork in the road. And this is where, if you're in a team managed project, you don't have this advantage, right? But in these company managed projects, you have this power. And so when we are going to apply our workflow, the new one that we just made, we can apply it. We can simply check the checkbox at the top and say, hey, all the issue types get this workflow. Or let's just say we just want the bug to have it. So if we do that, then I just click on finish, and only the bug is going to have that issue type. Now, this again does present new challenges, new complexities that, again, if you need help, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to walk with you and help you and your team out. But this is where you have some problems, right? This is where you do want to consult with a professional to essentially help you, guide you through this process, because doing this is one thing, but again, there's more consequences as a result. But let's just keep it simple. We're going to apply our new workflow to all of the issue types. Again, just to keep it simple, to not make this into a sales pitch of like, hey, hire me to help you, right? But we're going to do this, right? So essentially what we've done is we just swapped. That's all we've done. We swapped the old workflow with the new one. And if I go over here and I hit refresh, you will then be able to see your new workflow. Wrong, because when you do that, you still have yet another publish button. So because you may have not noticed, all the changes we did on our inactive workflow are automatically saved, but localized to that workflow. They haven't been published. So now that we've swapped the workflow from an active one for an inactive one, Jira's like, okay, now it's time for you to publish. And so we're going to publish this so that this workflow takes effect. But when we do a publish, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you will be presented with this screen. And the mainly you're presented with this screen usually under just one scenario. And that scenario is when you delete a status, if there were issues that were in that status, you have not just pulled the rug from underneath Jira, and Jira's going like, wait, hold up, wait a minute. We have a problem here. I used to have a status called accepted. It's gone. It's not in the new workflow. What do you want me to do to all those issues that were over there? And this is where you now have to make a call. Now, as a Jira admin, I feel like I'm not qualified to make this determination. So when we get to the screen, I usually have that person that requested the change on call with me so that we can go, okay, you tell me. Accepted is gone. You wanted it gone, right? Because again, I don't everything I demoed to you today, this is not something as Jira admins that we dream about at night. Somebody in your company is gonna go, hey Alex, can you delete this status and add these other statuses and whatever, right? Somebody else gives you the requirements. So we're just going to be sitting down with them and going, okay, so accepted is not going to be just in progress. And so, little trick, you don't have to do it for all of them because this one tells you how many issues are impacted. This is just a formality. So I do it out of formality, but really only the ones that have a number here, those are the ones you got to worry about. So I'm going to, these bottom two, those are really the two that you have to worry about, right? Click associate, and then we're going to watch a little bit of paint dry, which means Jira's going to go do its thing. And so we just wait and wait and wait. And luckily, again, hopefully, fingers crossed, you're paid by the hour because this is a great way to make a quick buck because you get paid to watch a progress bar grow. That's my favorite part about IT. Little tangent. In IT, anytime you get paid to watch progress bars go across the screen, that's a good day for me. I love that. So just click on acknowledge, and that workflow is now active. And now we hit refresh, and we do the drop down. We're done. We'll be able to only go to the statuses that our workflow allows. So cancel was the only status. But if I grab another item that was like in to do, the next status is going to be either canceled because we have that all transition, or we're going to be able to start basically going to the next step, which then means we can go to the next step, right? And when we're in testing, remember we had lines back, so we can start over or we can fail our testing. And so these are the only paths, right? Again, if it's not written, if there's no transitionary line, it ain't going anywhere. So you want to be very, very careful, very, very intentional there, that those transitions are all there. Because if I move to start in progress and I'm like, wait, hold up, I want to go back, I can't. I can only go forward. My workflow only allows me to go forward. So that's how we add those statuses. Now we're presented with a different problem though, because when we go back and look at our board has our accepted status still, but not our new statuses. So this is where it's a two-step process. You modify the workflow, you do all the workflow stuff, and now you got to come in over here, configure board, and now you got to clean up these boards. Now, accepted, you'll notice has a little warning here. So that means we got to get rid of it. So just simply move it over here to the unmapped. And then we're just going to rename this to be like in review. Now, you can rename these columns. You're not going to kill the world like you do when you rename a status. So you're good there. And then canceled, I'm just going to stack it with my last column. And once you do that, all the statuses have been accounted for. And now your board is a good representation. Now, the rules of that workflow apply to the board as well. So if I take this story and I try to move it to testing, it won't let me. I have to follow the workflow. So I can move it to architecture review. From architecture review, I can move it to testing. You'll notice that my columns are now out of order, so I might have to reorder that. But now from testing, I can go back because I have those transitions, or I can go forward, right? And so again, your board is going to respect whatever transitions you do or don't create in your workflow. So we're going to pause there for a second because that, my friends, I would say that's like 90% of what I do daily as a Jira admin. I'm doing something at that caliber where I'm adding a new status, adding a transition, swapping out workflows, right? I'm doing all that kind of stuff. And then obviously I'm updating the boards. So we have a question here. Is there anything in Jira that converts the workflows into a list or other format so you can sense check transitions with the team? Kind of. So when you go to the workflow or the project settings and you're inside your workflow and you're in the editor, you can see it as a text like this, right? But also when you're editing the workflow, you have the option to edit as a diagram or as text. I absolutely hate the text version. I don't like this at all. My recommendation is I like to be in the diagram mode, right? This is usually to do what you're saying. And then I like to check this checkbox that says show transition labels. And I like just to move things around so that everything's visible. And that way you can see all the transitions. And so this is what I typically give my teams and be like, hey, here's all the transitions that we have today. I need you to give me a picture that have the names on the lines, the names in the boxes. And so I forced them, since they're the ones with the requirement, to give it to me the way they want it, with the new transition names or whatever. The other thing that I want you guys to know is that everything we just did, there is a moment in time where it's like there's a point of no return. I just went through all those motions and I hit publish, right? And then remember we did the mapping and all that stuff. We hit that, we watched a little paint dry, and then we were good, right? There's a moment in time though, once we go through those steps, that if somebody from the back of the room goes, can you delete this other status? That is, my friends, an unfortunate scenario, because now that we've gone through all this homework, now that we've gone through all these steps, I mean, there's a silver lining. You practice more, right? But now that you've gone through all these steps and somebody's like, oh, we didn't want that status. Now that we've seen the new workflow in action, we changed our mind. We want to go in a different direction. You have to start over. You have to start with the new, make a copy of the workflow, work off the inactive workflow, do your changes, reapply the workflow to the project, and then publish your changes, do the mapping as appropriate. You have to do this consistently over and over and over. Every time that somebody asks for a new, well, remember those two big ones, right? Delete a status or add a transition. So my recommendation to you is, before you publish, before you're ready to cross your T's and dot your I's, ask, hey, folks, any other changes you would like to get done? Because, again, not that it's impossible, because it's not impossible. And again, the silver lining is you just get to practice more, right? I've done thousands and thousands of these because of this exact scenario. But it's just annoying, right? It's an annoyance as a Jira admin that you have to, every time that you need to make a change like that, you have to go through these motions. All of them, right? Start with the copy, make your changes, apply the workflow, right? It's just, it's an annoying thing. So just ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. If anybody has questions, now would be the time, or forever hold your peace, right? Because otherwise, again, it just gets annoying, right? It's part of your job, so you're still going to do it, right? You're paid to do it, but again, it's just one of my pet peeves here that I hate. Let's see. Malik's got a question. How can I associate a specific custom field with specific issue type? Let's say bug source custom field is only bug. Okay, so great question, Malik. You're going to want to come back in September, because September we're going to cover screens. So that is not a workflow thing. That is a screen thing. Okay, so we will be talking about that in the future. Okay, a couple of other things then to kind of just wrap this up and end this training, right? So obviously we did a lot of changes to our workflow. And earlier at the beginning, we talked about schemes, right? And the schemes really can be used in one of two ways. Method number one is the scenario I described at the beginning, where you're on a mission to create a brand new workflow, right? So you create a brand new blank canvas, straight, like just white sheet of paper. You make a new workflow, or you make 2 or 3 workflows, right? It's up to, again, whatever the requirements are. You put those workflows, that bucket of workflows, in a scheme, a brand new scheme as well, that has that configurations all set up, and then you apply that scheme to the project, right? So that's a scenario. The other scenario is, remember when I went to the project and I went to the project settings, and then I went to the workflows, and then I added the workflow? You can't always do that. If your projects share your workflow, right? So the beautiful thing about company managed projects and about workflow schemes is that they can be shared. So rather than, like, let's just assume that another team, right? Let's assume I had another project over here, engineering support. They want the same. They're like, oh, we like what they did. We want that. Like, whatever, everything they have, we want it too. You're like, oh, great. Now I got to go do it all over. No, you're in company managed projects. You don't have to start over, right? In company managed projects, you simply apply that scheme that has all the configurations already for you, and you just swap it out. So I'm going to go to this project here. I'm going to go to my workflows. Even though it's a service managed project, that's less relevant. And you can just simply click on scheme, and you go and find that scheme for that project that we just did, right? And so what would it be? Oh boy. See, this is why. Oh, here it is. This is the mobile one, right? And then we hit associate, and then we got to do the mapping, right? So we got to go through all these steps. I'm not going to go through all the steps because, in the interest of time, I don't have time. But yeah, that's how the schemes work. You basically swap or share those schemes. And then the other little annoying thing is that, again, if two projects share the same scheme and you want to make a change, like add a status, you just can't add a status to the workflow. You have to go to the global setting, which is the scheme, and make it at the scheme level, and then everything will work. One last tip here before we close out. If you do go down the route of making a brand new, right? So if you were to go to workflows, if you go to the gear, you go to issues, and you go to workflows, and you create a brand new workflow, right? If you go down this path and you add a transition or a status of done, one gotcha for those who stayed to the end, you're gonna benefit from probably the best headache that I'm gonna avoid you from having. If you do this, if you add a status of done, right? Let's just say we have these two statuses, and you publish this to a project, you're gonna hate yourself forever. And the reason that is because this transition to done, because we are in a brand new workflow and we didn't do a copy of an existing workflow, the resolution is not going to be set. By default, every single Jira workflow that comes shipped with Jira has a post function that's already built in that sets the resolution to done when you transition to the status of done. And a little bit more advanced, but I'm giving it for everybody that's stuck around, right? And so when you add a brand new workflow and you're doing it all new, you want to come in here and set your resolution to be done. Because if you don't do this and you're working off of a completely brand new workflow, none of your issues are ever going to be resolved and none of them are ever going to be crossed out. And your board's just going to be very, very overwhelmed with a bunch of work that isn't being kicked off your board because nothing's being resolved. So make sure if you're working on a brand new workflow, you always add this to those whatever finished status you have. Otherwise, you're going to be very, very mad. So, folks, that's pretty much it. I just want to close out here with, if you want to take your skills to the next level, make sure you scan that QR code. In that link tree, you will find a link to my new book that Ronnie and I have published. Follow me on LinkedIn. Send me a little message still. Tell me you took the course. I accept, because there's a lot of people out there and most people want jobs. I don't have jobs to give. But if you are interested, follow me on LinkedIn. Subscribe to this channel, folks. We are trying to grow this channel. Every single Thursday, we live stream. Every single week, we give you the latest Atlassian news via our news break. So if you want to stay up to date with the latest and greatest happening in the Atlassian ecosystem, check out the Jira Life. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Make sure you subscribe to Tech Tutorials if you want over 600 videos on how to use Jira. I got videos for you over there. I got free courses from Sato. I got paid courses through Udemy. And of course, I have a merch store that you can take advantage of as well. So scan that QR code, help support this channel. And thank you very much for being here. We'll see you next month, where next month we'll cover the screens. So we'll talk about fields and screens. Thank you all.